Okay.
Here we go.
Here with the amazing ErnelMartinez. So yeah, so what topics were you thinking that you wanted to touch on for this? Because you don't have to cover them all, just one or two.
So should we speak more about sort of how Amber got involved with the first spaces at?
That would be great. That'd be a great place to start.
You know, that's really when sort of Amber kind of formalized itself as a collective. You know, prior to that, we had did the Roots mural, and we worked collaboratively with the Roots, the band, to sort of create this public art piece out there on South Street.
Right.
But it wasn't until our application was accepted by Spaces that we kind of realized, well, we could work collectively in a different capacity. So it wasn't just doing public art, but it could be more community involved. And then we could practice engaging the community in a more creative way. So there was, you know, we had a year-long commitment to the village. And at that time, it was growing pretty rapidly, to be real. And, you know, and it was trying to sort of formulate itself in such a way that it would have the infrastructure to support these different types of artists doing different types of projects. You know, I think King Britt at that time was doing music with the people in the community, and they had to build a studio, music studio, and so forth. We had another team of artists who was doing some other work as well. There was a major project happening. I think at that time that the big Germantown project they did along Germantown Ave was either going to start, or there was like prepping for it, what have you. And so,
with Hassan Han, the guys
from village was just starting. Right, that was going to happen. I don't think that happened yet, but I think that was going to happen soon. So the village was in an interesting space, and so, you know, when we was accepted for the residency, we're really excited about, you know, how do we engage this community in a sort of a deeper way, where it didn't feel so superficial. You know, I think a lot of murals tend to be sort of on the surface in terms of engaging communities, and the commitments are not particularly long in terms of investment in those communities.
Right.
So doing the residency gave us the opportunity to really get to know people in a different capacity. We spent a lot more time thinking about programming, and, you know, and just from having kind of really informal conversations, we discovered that the importance of food and what food meant to storytelling, and then we said, well, let's, you know, I don't know who had the idea, but it was like, well, why don't we do a project that's sort of focused around food and how food brings people together. And then we start to have these more involved conversations with people that was already involved with the village, because you had like a set community that's already there on Alder Street, folks that lived on that block.
True.
And so with, you know, having conversations with them, and then talking to Aviva at the time about the capacity to do a project like that. They had a space there on Alder Street that was our residency, that we said, well, let's turn this into sort of a community kitchen and a hub, right? So people in the community can come there and partake in making healthier food options or meals for themselves or for people in the community. And you know, that was kind of the sort of foundation or that we started from. So let's start with this and build from that. And then, you know, the idea of having sort of a series of meals over a summer would be a way of bringing the community together. And how do we sort of transform this space in the village that was outside of our little kitchen area? You know, we wanted to sort of take over the village and grow it outside of our little space.
Right.
And the whole facilities of the village to engage the community. And, you know, that I forget what the little park is called, the little plaza area was called.
Oh, right. What is
the sort of beautiful little plaza area.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, let's use that to have these outside meals, and that's what we did. So once a month, we would have these coordinated outside meals.
Mhm.
And we went to transform that space, during the during the weekends and night times to be used for drugs. But we said, well,
Right.
let's occupy space and have it serve a positive function in the community. And so that's what we did. We created this sort of team of cooks. We partnered up with I forget the young brother's name, who was a young chef at the time, that was part of the village. But he was taking cooking classes, and he was,
Oh
so
yeah, I think I remember who you're talking about. Yeah.
I forget the young brother's name.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, long story short, we had these beautifully sort of 5-course meals that were all healthy meals that were sort of inspired by recipes that we got from people in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So the meals always had like a healthy bent to it. And the recipes were always sort of tied into memories, tied into like family recipes and so forth. And then we wanted to say, well, let's sort of share stories over food. And that was just a really neat way to make that happen.
Yeah.
We hired musicians to entertain. We had film screenings at these dinners. We had musicians at these dinners. We had
Yeah.
performers. Keep it lively and safe, and to get people involved. Like, it was called, I'm rambling, but the whole thing was
No,
called
I
Village
remember
Table,
it. Like, you're bringing me back there
right?
because I attended
Yeah,
at least one of them I know, and it was just beautiful. The lights, and I remember,
the
didn't you
lighting.
have like special plates or something like that? Weren't there
Yeah,
like
so
original? I remember there were
yeah,
plates that were made.
yeah. I still have them in my house. It's funny, like we did like a plate making workshop where we had people from all
Oh, at
over
that
the.
place, at the art place, the art, that young lady, I think you collaborated with her because I remember I went there and that's where the workshop was, the young black
Yeah,
owned spot. I forget her name though. I know.
yeah. This
We
is
blame, we can
like
blame
10
it
years
on
ago. So
COVID. Look, I don't remember
yeah,
anything.
yeah. You can forgive me. It's been 10 years, but we made plates. We made the actual tables that people ate on
Right. Right.
of like repurposed materials. So, we would look around the neighborhood, we'd find pallets, we'd find like just throwing out objects, and we would build these
Right.
tables with the community. And for you to get a ticket to attend one of these dinners, you had to do some kind of like exchange with us. And a way of getting a ticket was like, help us build a table or help us make a plate or come
Right.
and volunteer the day of or whatever, and you get a ticket. So it was all these sort of creative ways of engaging the community. And I think it was a hit, right? Like, the food was amazing.
It
We had
was.
people who lived in that neighborhood who never came to the village
Mhm.
before. That was their first time
That
actually
was their
sitting
first
down,
time.
talking
Mhm.
to people there. And they knew it was there for years, but they never felt like, it's not that they didn't feel welcome, but they just didn't feel like, didn't have an opportunity to sort of go there and be a part of whatever. And
That's the
so
power of breaking bread and gathering around the table. Yeah.
absolutely, the power of breaking bread is phenomenal. And we had people like from all over the city. They came out, joined us, and they were these very like special moments, and as a collective, it was the first time you sort of realized, like, wow, we could really impact the community in a more profound way.
Mhm.
And so that sort of put us on a trajectory for us to say, well, how can we continue to sort of push what community engagement means, right? Where
Right.
our existence in these communities, even if they're temporary, they're not reductive, right?
Yeah.
That they're actually we're actually leaving something behind. We're investing something, and we're like um, trying to leave a positive legacy in these communities that we're interacting with. And so, yeah, that project really did sort of help us realize kind of who we are as a collective and what we could potentially be.
Mm-hmm. And that's beautiful to learn that because I felt like because I knew you guys, maybe I felt like Amber Art and Design was always information, but it's interesting to
Yeah,
learn. And I think it's super cool and a testament to the village and how they do things that's really where things jumped off and solidified for you all as a collective. And that makes sense. Like in hindsight, when I think about that time, the fact that you all were living there and spending so much time with the community, in the community, working and creating there, hosting events, like that makes total sense. And as you're saying too, with your trajectory, like I feel like Amber Art and Design is really, really like taking that community engagement to the next level. Like when I think about the work that y'all have done with subsequent projects, I know that y'all really, have a lot of integrity with your approach to, really, like you said, making an impact and not just passing through. So that's beautiful. And then thinking about like this future gallery space that the village is building, what do you think could be an improvement or even, carried over from what you experienced that was really working and effective and positive in that first Spaces residency? What would you like to see in future residencies that this space might support?
That's a great question. What I would like to see happen at the village with the new space there. I love the idea of of an open studio where people could come in, people from the community come in and have access to a studio sort of at any time they need it.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
I think that's really, really, really dope. And like open door policy is great because there's always like programming that's associated with these spaces, right? Like, well, we have classes here, classes there, but to have a safe spot for someone to be creative at any time they want it or they need it.
That's beautiful.
Particularly post-COVID, right? Is that, like the last 2 years, you have people who had no outlet to let out some of that creative energy, and to have a space that can say, okay, well, guys, look, we'll give you a safe, secure spot that you guys can use.
Yeah.
24. That's really a community space. And that'd be dope.
I love that because, that's one thing that a lot of artists, no matter what level they're at, you can easily gain and lose a studio based on the ebb and flow of your life because it's such a luxury to have a dedicated space to create,
Yeah.
And so to think about like the way there's so much of the co-working space for office space, to do work. Why not, co-working for like a studio space that has all the things you need, all the tools, supplies, and all you got to do is show up with your ideas and create. And, I think that would be something the village could really facilitate, because there's so much talent in that neighborhood. And probably a lot of untapped, unnurtured talent, right? Like talent that folks have never had a chance to really see grow because it hasn't been supported by some of the resources that other artists have. So I love that idea. That's a great one.
Absolutely. And, I think that's something that's always overlooked is there's really not a lot of effort made in talent assessment within the community. Right.
Yeah.
And, and I've had I had the opportunity to work with nonprofits and organizations for quite a while. And there's always like a different perspective in terms of like aesthetics, right? Like this institutional aesthetics, and then there's like community aesthetics, right? And they don't always jive, right? And there's been times where I've worked with a nonprofit here, and they're like, well, we want to do this dope zine to reflect the community and so forth, right? So let's hire a local artist to do it, or a local designer to do it, right? Well, they hire a local designer, and then they quickly realize, well, the designer doesn't design in the same aesthetic as what this institution, this nonprofit think is like represents their branding, right? So there's like this difference. And so, I've just seen it too many times where people, they're like, there's always like this gap between branding from an institution and branding from the community or aesthetics from the community. And well, how do we sort of navigate or have conversations about what's more important, right? That we just don't slap our label of whatever institution we are on this object, this thing that this person created. And I don't want to get too specific, but I'm just saying like that's something I've noticed quite a bit.
Right.
And one of the other challenges is always investment, right? How do we invest in these communities in a way that's truly beneficial?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that Amber has always tried to do is relocate resources to the hands of the people in the community on the block.
Right.
So if you are a young artist, a young person, or a person who's just struggling, whatever, how do we get the money from these institutions into your pocketbook? That's been our goal. How do we get jobs in the community, right? How do we get the young brothers in the corners or the young sisters on the corner and give them opportunities of economic empowerment,
right,
access to resources, opening doors of networking, right? How do we broaden our personal networks as a collective and share that with people in the community?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, I like somebody say, hey, I like making t-shirts. Okay, great. Well, how do we as artists tap into our networks to give this young person the opportunity of making their t-shirts and then sell them?
Right.
How to market your brand, how to set up a small business. And then we start so that's something we've always tried to do.
Right. And if I don't know if I shared this in my details with that initial email, but one of the things that is a part of this project is that there will be a training program for youth to learn how to install art, and they will get, the expertise that they can then, add to their skill sets that, basically could take them far in life if they so choose to stay in the art world. But a lot of those skills also transfer to other things as well. But a lot of folks, in terms of the feedback around this project, is that like training in all areas, really, and like you said, like how to market oneself, like how to cultivate your skills and create a brand and all these things, because, it's a luxury not only to have a studio space, but things like agents and stuff. Like when you have representation as an artist, that's how so many of my friends in New York were getting things done. Like they had to land some sort of representative, a gallery. But without that, sometimes artists, like they have to learn how to do it on their own,
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we always got to try to break that model, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think we're living in a society in a day where you could sort of create your own path now. I think kind of like transitioning out of that old model of needing representation.
Right.
Even our musicians today, the dopest new rappers, the MCs, they don't have record labels. So I think the art world is sort of turned in that way to some degree. A lot of art schools are still functioning in that older model of what you're talking about.
Right.
What was great about being at Moore was that we were trying to explore ways of doing it. This past semester, I was teaching a class at Penn. I was teaching a graduate course at Penn, and working with the landscape architecture department and the architecture department on doing some public art in different kind of ways, and working with artists, or having artists be collaborators with architects, with landscape architects.
That's
and
great.
How to engage the community in a different kind of way, right? So it's like we got to find new paths and new opportunities as creative people, or creative thinkers. And I think that's kind of where the energy needs to be, kind of moving forward, right?
Yeah. No, for sure. And so in thinking about that too, in terms of the exhibition of your art, like as you branch out as an individual and as a collective in terms of the space of your work and how, like where it holds space out in the public sphere, but also in an actual brick and mortar gallery space, or even virtually or digitally, because there's so much with the boom of the NFT and digital art. I mean, media art has been a thing for a while, but now that's, the pandemic has changed a lot in terms of how people are, occupying digital space and virtual space. So as an artist, what do you think like a gallery of the future would need or should have, ideally to represent and exhibit artist work of the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So galleries have to be more flexible in terms of how they function, right? That is not, like you mentioned before, it just can't be brick and mortar, that it has to be able to function virtually. It has to be accessible as well. And I think 2 years of COVID really forced a lot of galleries and other institutions to sort of think about how they function in this new world, particularly with things like NFTs, you know, that we might not need these spaces nearly as much. However, they're not going anywhere, right? And you know, what we start talking about gallery, you know, maybe there needs to be a hybrid version where it's more of community spaces as well. And there, I can't call it a flex space, but it has to be multifunctional, right?
Yes. No, but that's been an operative word. A lot of feedback has been around flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have to be flexible, which means that, well, maybe it could be a space where grandmothers could come on the weekends and quilt together, right? On one hand,
right.
Maybe it could, right? As a creative space, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it could be, you know, then it'll flip itself and allow itself to be a fashion studio for young people who want to do fashion design, right? And they want to have a fashion show. So it has to have the capacity to do so many different things because there's so many different creative thinkers and creators within any particular community.
Right.
And you want to be able to serve all of those different formats.
No, for sure.
Right. And I think the village has grown so much in 10 years. It's crazy. Like I barely recognize it like today, right?
Right.
Buildings everywhere. And that's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I want to encourage the village to continue the path that it's doing, but not forget sort of where it started, what the goal was when Spaces first started, and yeah, I mean, I think that's essentially it. You know, what I'm.
Yeah, no, and then I think if you don't mind, I wanted to ask you like one final question, because I think that yeah, that you would probably have some insight on this idea of, well, maybe let me back up and just say that the term gallery is not necessarily the final word for this project. It was really just the most accessible container. Calling it a gallery was really just kind of what the initial proposal was, for lack of a better term. But we realized that, you know, this is going to be much more than a gallery space. And it's not just about art, but it's more so, even more about community, you know, and what the community needs in this time and then also in the future, because times are changing constantly and they're changing at a rapid pace. And we've experienced that, like, you know, in like just such a profound way in these last couple of years. But this idea that, you know, times of crisis, and not just crisis, but loss, like, how are you thinking that artists can play a role in supporting spaces that are healing, that are supportive even for grief, you know, because this is something that I think kind of happened maybe by accident or just organically, you know. During the pandemic, there were a lot of art spaces that were functioning to distribute resources for people, or even just a hub to connect, because there was just so much disconnect, right? Like people had to find ways to like reach out and touch one another because like the world was falling apart. So the village is definitely set on thinking about a mind, body, spirit space, a space for healing, and again, indoor, outdoor. So flexibility has always been on the agenda as far as the design for this space, and thinking about how it could be indoor and outdoor, similarly to how you even started off with your conversation around spaces and your residency, with having like outdoor farm to table dinners and things like that, using the outdoor space as well as the indoor space. But thinking like, how can artists take the lead in kind of shaping how these spaces will function, and even how they might welcome the community?
Yeah, and I think one possibility, or as you mentioned before, during COVID, one of the problems was really mobility.
Yeah.
And I think a gallery has to be mobile, because there were times when we couldn't leave our houses and we wanted to connect, right? So, and I think mobility is huge, and even this little van I have right here.
Right, I love it. I love it.
It's my mobile studio, right? So, like, for me, it's like, oh well, this could be a community engagement van, right? So, like, I could go to a different community, interact with folks, and it could be sort of on wheels. So, I think galleries need to have the capacity to be mobile as well. I don't know what that looks like. At Fleischer, you had color wheels back in the day. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, no, I remember.
Right. So colors was dope, right? Because it could get around the city, you could have whatever class. And I think that kind of component is vital, because of lots of issues, right? Because of the lack of mobility, people who can't leave their houses or what have you. So sometimes the community can't come to the space, so the space has to go to the community.
Yeah.
And when I've worked with like the PMA in the past, and they were like spending a lot of energy, like, well, how do we get more people into the doors? I was like, well, just take the doors to the people, right? Like, let's flip that question around and like kind of, so it's not like,
I love it.
It's that you have to think about it like that, right? Because people ain't gonna leave their houses. Like, yo, I don't know what's okay. So how do you get the art to them, basically? Yeah. And that's something I've always been interested in. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of why I do murals, right? It's like, well, if I do a mural in your block, you'll see it.
You'll see it.
And you'll have to engage with it. You have to deal with it. So, a gallery, well, can a gallery be a hub for public art?
Right. Can a gallery be a hub for public art? Yeah.
Right. And can it facilitate those conversations around the democratic process of people having some kind of self-determination in terms of how they want their space to be occupied by art, right? Or do they want art in that space? What should it look like? Whose aesthetic should be like at the core of whatever that project is? Like, sort of, can it function in engaging the community in that capacity as well? Right. So when you said like a sort of a hub or a flex space or a multi-purpose space, it has to be like Voltron. It has to be like a transformer. It has to be able to transform on the drop of a dime. Yeah. Facilitate all these different things. And I think that makes perfect sense. What helps. Yeah. And I think that's what helps smaller institutions survive, as opposed to like big institutions like museums, like, because there's these sort of administrative, structural, bureaucratic restrictions that limit their capacity of what they could do. Right. And when you have like Donna Van Heeswick, who came to the PMA, and she did the Perlman building transformation, where they did the citywide project. Oh, Philadelphia Assembled. Throughout Philadelphia, Philly Assembled. And they had to do this revisioning of what the museum could how it functions as an art space on a large scale. It's much harder to do, right? Because of its size. No, true. But smaller spaces, you have a lot more room to play with that type of stuff. No, I love it. And yeah. So I mean, so that's one of the benefits of it. And did you check out Staying Power? Because that was kind of like public art, like the focus was kind of on a public art experience, particularly because it was happening during COVID. But it speaks to what you're talking about as far as, how can like a brick and mortar public space, like a gallery, support public art out in the world,
Um, and, you know, how can there be an ebb and flow of those kinds of experiences, you know, in times of safety and everything's flowing and everybody's healthy and good, to those times when we might even be back in a lockdown moment, or even like if it has to do with climate change. I mean, God knows, you know, what the reason could be.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, we just don't know what the future holds. But you're ready though, but Ernel ready, or Ernel and his fam are ready.
I got the bug out fan, man. Like, you know, we got to bug out. We got to.
You're ready. You know,
like, we out. but you need to have, I think, like, you know, I want to get art everywhere.
Right.
Right. Like, and could like the Village or a place like the Village engage another community virtually?
Right.
Does it have that? Could it, you know, partner up with a number of institutions to do something different, right? Function in a different capacity. I don't know. I don't. These are questions.
Right. Some sort of coalition or collaboration on a national, even global level. You know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. So it stops being, because, you know, and I don't run an institution or a nonprofit, but like there's always sort of this internal kind of, you know, direct internal kind of focus. And it's something that happens, I think, with most institutions, that they don't think about true partnerships. When I say true partnerships, it's like, well, okay, well, let's have a partnership with the block leader. Let's have a partnership with the local church. Let's have a partnership with this institution, that institution, and that institution across, and then we can start to think of impacting not on a global scale, but definitely on a larger scale, right? So it's not just our blocks, it's not just within our like direct vicinity, because there's already like models of success all over the country that's already doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it works great.
And it works great.
Well, let's not keep reinventing the wheel. And I think there's a lot of energy in reinventing the wheel over and over and over again, right? Let's bypass all that, see what works, share resources. That's something that's very, very hard to do, is to convince people to share the resources.
I know.
Particularly
people don't realize that's actually how we expedite our collective liberation that people talk about. Like if we share some resources.
You got to share the resources, right? But we're always, you know, in that nonprofit world, there's always that struggle to keep afloat.
Yeah, operating from that space of scarcity, you know.
Right. And that's the challenge.
Yeah.
So, but you know, I come from a country. I come from a place of like, well, if I got one piece of bread, I'm gonna share it with you.
Right.
If I got a piece of bread, I'll break it in half. We can share. But then we'll both have full bellies. Right. We'll both have some food in our stomach. So, if we within an institution that might not have a lot, but we're gonna share it. And we want to share it wide and far.
Right.
The impact is different. The effect is different. The legacy is different, right? The investment is different. And that's what I always want to like encourage the individual artists, the collective, the nonprofit, the whatever, to kind of think and have that attitude in whatever they're doing. And I think, and finally, like beyond everything I said, I think there's a level of ethical reinvestment that's needed, right? Do we have to do things in an ethical way as much as anything else? Right, and if you know, if it's done in an ethical way, and I don't know who determines whether or not it's ethical or not. That's another conversation, right? But if you're coming with it with the best intentions.
Right. That's the most important thing, because right now in this world, we need to know what your intentions are. Like, we need to know up front.
Exactly. That transparency of intentions is vital.
Yeah,
right?
It's key.
you do have a lot of shit being spoken in the art world. And I think folks are savvy enough now to pick up, particularly if you're from the block and you know when you're being hustled, right? You already got that there. So, but what I'm saying is that I think transparency in terms of expectations, transparency in terms of investment, transparency in terms of intentions is super important. So whatever the envisioning or however the space is kind of realized, sort of moving forward, I think always being honest with the people that you're dealing with is super important.
I love that. That's a perfect note to end on, because if you don't have that, like, you don't got nothing, right? I mean, as far as like being able to trust, transparency is also about trust, right? And I think that when you're talking about building community and relationships, like that's essential, you know? And that's what the village is about. So, and look, you gave way more than your qualified, your required answers. So thank you so much. It's so great to see you and hear you, and then to learn all about.
I still want my dollar. You owe me $1 still.
I owe you $1?
You owe me $1.
What did I owe you $1 for?
Years ago, I tell you, years ago, we was in the car. We was driving in the car. I forget what it was. We was getting a ride or something. And a song came on, right? And he was like, oh, it was 2 occasions came on the radio, right?
Oh, 2 occasions, like, Babyface?
I said, no, it ain't. He said, yeah, it is. I said, Lee, that's not Babyface. He's like, yeah, it is. I said, that's Dwelle. And he was like, nah, no, it ain't. I said, I bet you $1. He's like, I bet. We shook on it.
Wait, how is 2 occasions Dwelle and not Babyface?
Look it up. It's not. It wasn't Babyface. He was part of the group at the time when they did the song. Him and his brothers.
Dwelle from Philly?
No, look up Google 2 occasions and you'll see what I'm talking about.
You hold please, because I'm about to do that.
It's $1. That's the way though.
I'm about to find out with this brother. I already know my Babyface because that was on all my mixtapes. 2 occasions.
I know. That's what we're talking about.
Wait. 2 occasions. See? It's called The Deal. Who is The Deal? What?
Yeah, The Deal. Yeah, The Deal. Yes, I told you.
And wait, The Deal is, that's not Dwelle though. Dwelle's too young.
No, that's The Deal. It was The Deal. You're right.
Oh, you're saying not Dwelle, but The Deal. You're saying you said it was The Deal.
Oh, yeah.
All right, look, but you know what? Integrity is everything. So if I owe you $1, brother, you know what I mean? Okay. Send me your Cash App.
Listen.
Send me your Cash App, and you can spend that $1 out there in the woods.
$1.
It'll probably cost more in fees to get you that $1, but I'm gonna do it just on GP. Just on GP. I'm looking at the video now. God, that's hilarious. Oh, but Babyface is in there though. You see that Babyface is in there. Yeah.
That's him and his brothers.
Wow, look, they're doing the doo-wop too. That's cute.
That was before they became After 7. It was like they did After 7 after that. You remember that?
Yeah, but wait, have you been holding this against me this whole time? This $1?
No, it's something I want to teach you about though.
That's hilarious. Well, you got a great memory. I love that. I vaguely remember. Now it's coming back.
Yeah, it was like a anyway. Well,
oh my God. But look, please give your family my regards. And the next time you meet up with the team, with the Amber crew, tell them all that Lee says hello and sends her love. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna send your email to somebody from the village office, like the folks, they'll be hitting you up to
she hit me up
for the payment or whatever. Okay.
She hit me up. Yep, thank you so much.
Okay, yay. Thank you so much, Ernel. You take care of yourself and you be safe out there in the woods.
Hey, yo, it's the South, man.
I know. All right, be good. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.